Hi there, and listen up. Get your finger out of your nose, shit just got real. The Game of Thrones prequel TV series, House of the Dragon, has just officially announced its first cast member. This isn't a leak, it's an official press release announcement by HBO itself. The casting announcements phase has started. Check back every day. For all we know, they're going to announce Rhaenyra tomorrow or other major characters from this. That we are now in the active news cycle again. Production news, casting news, not just leaks. Specifically, this first announcement says that veteran British actor Paddy Considine has just been cast as King Viserys Targaryen I, father of Rhaenyra and Aegon II, whose rivalry leads to a great civil war upon his death, known as the Dance of the Dragons. Paddy Considine has a good track record. He's known for projects like HBO's The Third Day and The Outsider, and he played a gangster on Netflix's Peaky Blinders. Last year he was nominated for a Tony Award working on the Broadway play The Ferryman. Now, he's been in a lot of things, but I know him best from three specific roles. He played Stephen in The World's End, that apocalyptic comedy, and he played Sergeant Parks in the movie adaptation of the critically acclaimed sci-fi novel The Girl with All the Gifts. He was the sergeant in that. He also played Banquo in the 2015 Michael Fassbender film adaptation of the Scottish play. Banquo, lesser and yet greater. The character description put out by HBO itself in their official press release says that, quote, Viserys was chosen by the lords of Westeros to succeed the old king, Jaehaerys Targaryen, at the Great Council of Harrenhal. A warm, kind, decent man, Viserys only wishes to carry forward his grandfather's legacy, but as we've learned from Game of Thrones, good men do not necessarily make for great kings. That's a pretty accurate description relative to the source material. I've said we have to focus on every time they put out a character description of, does this match the tone of what the books described, or are they going off book with this, particularly in the later Game of Thrones seasons, where they give out descriptions that are, this isn't what the book character is like, what are you talking about? But no, this is spot on what Viserys is like in the books. And I want to pick apart in the rest of this what we might be able to glean from it about their starting point, what exactly they want to do. But to start with, this is for everyone new to this, if you're trying to get acquainted with it, Aegon the Conqueror united the Seven Kingdoms using his dragons and forged the Iron Throne. I think most people who watched Game of Thrones without reading the books know about Aegon the Conqueror and making the Iron Throne. Jaehaerys Targaryen, who is mentioned in this press release, was Aegon I's grandson, who had a very long and peaceful 55-year reign, which was never matched before or since. He built the King's Road. He built all the major highways in Westeros to bind the realm together. He expanded trade. He codified all of their laws, standardized their currency. And the realm was so peaceful and prosperous that the population of Westeros fully doubled. What have the Targaryens ever done for us, eh? Ha. Jaehaerys had 9 children, but almost all of them died before he did. You don't need to know their names. Don't get confused with yourself like that. That this led to a succession crisis when the last of them died between his grandchildren, that he had 4 living grandchildren. But one was the younger brother of another one, and the other grandchild married the other one anyway, so it was actually a binary choice between 2 people. His oldest son had 1 child, a daughter, Rhaenys, while his second oldest son had 2 sons of his own, Viserys, and then his younger brother Daemon, right? Now, Rhaenys and Viserys had their own children by this point. Viserys married the 4th grandchild, who was a girl, and he had Rhaenyra. But it doesn't matter because Viserys is a male, and he's above her in that. Rhaenys had her own children, though, a boy and a girl, named Laenor and Laena. So there is a male heir on her side, her son. So when the last of Jaehaerys' immediate children died, his second son died of a burst appendix suddenly, about 2 years before Jaehaerys himself died. I mean, he didn't know when he was going to die, but he knew, I'm really old, I'm going to die soon, and my last clear heir, who's a direct son of me, has died. and we're left with a choice between basically two of my son's children. What are we going to do? That according to primogeniture, his oldest son's daughter's son, Rhaenyra, should have inherited, because under primogeniture, the oldest son's bloodline is superior, even if it's through a girl. On the other hand, you have the argument for proximity, which is, well, the closest male is his second son's son, Viserys. And it has nothing to do with precedent. It's medieval, it's sloppy, it's not codified, and it's politics. People believe what they want to believe that'll give them more power. And at the moment, the practical concern was really more than precedent or rules. Rhaenyra was a boy at the time, and Viserys was an adult man, and a decent administrator, a level-headed guy that everyone liked. So it wasn't really about the precedent of female rule or not, but are we going to give the realm to this boy or to the decent candidate who would make a good king? So this led to a lot of heated arguments, a lot of debate, and rather than risk a civil war, old Jaehaerys, wise as he was, decided to hold a great council at Harrenhal where all the lords of the realm would vote between these candidates. When I say all the lords of the realm, I don't just mean the top 7 that rule each region. I mean all of the lords down to the level of the Umbers or the Tarleys, all the local level people, and there's about a dozen major lords in each of the 7 kingdoms, so give or take, think there were about 100 major lords in this huge council, the biggest ever. And they met at Harrenhal because they said it was the only castle big enough to fit all of them and their retinues. And they met for weeks, they debated all the minor candidates. The 2 serious candidates were Rhaenyra or Viserys. And they had a secret ballot, and Viserys won, and he became the heir. And they were kind of worried that some people might still want to have a civil war, so even though it was supposed to be a secret ballot, the maesters leaked out. They said, without giving specific numbers or saying who voted for what, they said, guys, Viserys won by a landslide. He won by a factor of something like 20-1. Okay, so it's not worth having a rebellion. Rhaenyra really doesn't have that much support. It wouldn't be worth it. So everyone shrugged and went, well, okay, if we lost by such a huge margin, it doesn't make sense to fight it. Everyone agreed to this, and they left in peace. Though it must be said that the Starks were some of the few people who voted for Rhaenyra. And that'll be important later, that most of the people who voted for Rhaenyra, they eventually sided with Rhaenyra in the Civil War, that they realized the Starks would support her because they supported that precedent. Still, for the moment, everyone agreed to this, and there was a peaceful transition of power, and Jaehaerys, 2 years later, he died of old age in his own bed, and his grandson Viserys immediately succeeded him to the Iron Throne. So Aegon I conquered the 7 kingdoms and forged the Iron Throne. Aegon's grandson was Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys' grandson who succeeded him was Viserys. So when we talk about Viserys I, we're talking about Aegon the Conqueror's grandson's grandson. That the Council of Harrenhal was about only 100 years after the War of Conquest. Oh, also, if you're new to all this and haven't read the book stuff, and you're thinking back to Game of Thrones Season 1, and thinking, wait a minute, Daenerys' older brother was also named Viserys. Well, yeah, that's the point. Names frequently repeat in real-life royal dynasties. I mean, think of England with all the Georges and Williams they have, George III, Edward IV. That when Martin sat down to write the books, he said, I'm not going to have any limitations like a TV show would. That in TV shows, the network executives would say, never have characters with the same name. Like, you've been at like a workplace or something, or an office. If it's a big enough place, odds are you're going to run into 2 people having to have the same name. And that's just in real life, you're just out and about at work. We're talking about royal dynasties here, where in aristocracies, they tend to name new children after famous ancestors or a grandfather or something. So it is more realistic that, like England or something, there's a lot of people with repeating names. And in fact, if you go back to the very first episode of Game of Thrones Season 1, when they first formally introduced Dany's brother to Drogo, he's introduced as Viserys III. He's introduced as Viserys the third of that name. Well, this character we're talking about in House of the Dragon here is Viserys I, so the first, the third. And for anyone not familiar with the release history, the story of the Dance of the Dragons was covered in a series of prequel novellas that George R.R. Martin wrote, but later collected together and expanded into the anthology book called Fire and Blood. So you don't have to track down the novellas, they're superseded by the chapters that are bigger and more revised and expanded for Fire and Blood. And the Dance of the Dragons material actually starts at the midpoint of this anthology book, starting with the chapter Heirs of the Dragon. Because it's written as an in-universe history book that covers the first half of the Targaryen reign, which lasted 3 centuries, so this one book covers 150 years. And Martin himself has said, there's enough material in this to sustain more than one TV show. The Dance of the Dragons is just one idea from it. There's a couple in there. And because it's told linearly like that, there was a question of, well, which novella will they start telling in this TV show? That the actual war breaks out the same day that Viserys dies, on the very first page of the novella titled The Princess and the Queen. But the novella right before that one covers the 30-year reign of King Viserys, and it's titled The Rogue Prince. And the Rogue Prince novella explains how these two rival factions developed at court between his daughter and eldest child, Rhaenyra, and his second wife, her stepmother, Alicent Hightower. And we weren't sure, were they going to start with the war, or are they going to start with a season of setup? And based on this character description for Viserys they put out in this press release, it really seems like Season 1 of this show will be an adaptation of The Rogue Prince. And it'll have a lot of time skips in it, because The Rogue Prince covers the entire 30-year reign of Viserys. It starts with the Great Council of Harrenhal, when he becomes the heir and becomes king, when Rhaenyra is like 6 years old, and it ends when Rhaenyra is 32, and when her father dies and the Civil War breaks out. That might sound long. It's actually a fairly short novella. You know, it's thin, very thin compared to the one about the war, but it has a lot of time skips in it, briefly outlining, well, this is what Rhaenyra's life was like leading up to that, why these two factions hate each other. And this is great. This is what I would do. I would do Rogue Prince's Season 1, because if you just jump in with no setup, people wouldn't know who anyone is. Like, what are all these names and all these Aegons and Viseryses you're throwing at us? You need to explain this first. And if you think about it, that's what the A Song of Ice and Fire books did, and similarly the early Game of Thrones seasons that were directly based on them, where Book 1 or Season 1, if you think about it, that was mostly set up for the outbreak of the war rather than the actual war. It was explaining who these people are. Then Book 2, Season 2 of Game of Thrones, was when they present the actual war at its height. So you need setup like that, and I fully agree they should be doing the Rogue Prince stuff, otherwise you wouldn't know who anyone is. So what we're faced with here is, this is a succession war that breaks out upon Viserys' death, by definition, and his death happens on the very first page of The Princess and the Queen. The simple fact that this official press release is describing him as a full character, this paragraph full of description like this, they're starting with the Rogue Prince as Season 1, which is great. And I'm really surprised, because think about the implications of this, that in the press release, they are name-dropping the Great Council at Harrenhal. They are mentioning by name the old King Jaehaerys. They're not just going to skim over that is important enough that they are mentioning the name, even though they're usually, oh, we don't want to confuse people with too many names. That probably means the Great Council will appear on screen in some fashion, whether as a short flashback or really developed, I'm not sure. And, you know, from the way they're saying this, I think it really seems like we're going to see old King Jaehaerys as an on-screen character, which is exciting for anyone who sat through and read all of Fire and Blood, that we see his whole life. There's all these chapters on his 50-year reign. This is just going to be the very end of it, right before he dies. It's going to be a cameo. But still, I'm hyped that, yeah, they might get some big-name actor to play Jaehaerys for an episode or two as a guest spot at the very beginning of this show, and tie it all together, that Well, he's the grandson of Aegon the Conqueror. So people, get a sense of the time in this, that it's his grandson's grandchildren. And this press release also describes Viserys' characterization pretty well, that he's a genuinely good man and a good administrator. He's not a do-nothing king, but he's not ruthless and cunning. Now, he did rule for almost 3 decades in a long era of peace, which he largely inherited from his grandfather, but he didn't screw it up either. Nonetheless, he couldn't stop the growing court rivalries and intrigues during his reign. He wasn't stupid, he knew they were happening, he just thought he could fix them. So, he's sort of closer to a Ned Stark than a Robert Baratheon. Like, Ned honestly thought he could fix this honorably without anyone dying. Or like a Robert Baratheon with none of his best or worst qualities, that Viserys isn't a great warrior, but he's not a drunken womanizer either, and he's a good administrator, he knows how to keep the realm rich. The realm was very rich by the end of his reign, he actually did this pretty well. The same cannot be said of Robert, though I guess the one issue is, symbolizing all the peace and plenty in his reign. He liked feasting a lot, so he got very fat and plump over the years, to the point that, not in an evil way, just, hey, I'm a jolly old fat man, and by the end of it, his weight got so bad that he had serious health issues, like the diabetes and stuff, and it really impacted his health. And so there's all this debate in fandom of whether, was he a good king or not, because he wasn't ignoring the problems, and so he thought he could fix them. I think he was a better king than Robert was, and at least, the realm grew prosperous under him. But that last bit about his health leads to a question that I've been following for a while here. When you're examining the actors in these casting descriptions, Paddy Considine is 47 years old. King Viserys died at 52 years old. If you've been following my channel, I've been doing report videos on the leaked casting descriptions for Viserys' daughter Rhaenyra and his younger brother Daemon, and both of these casting sheets tended to describe the actors they were looking for as about 5 to 10 years younger than they would have been at Viserys' death when the war breaks out, that instead of a 32-year-old Rhaenyra, they're asking for a mid-20s Rhaenyra. Now, it's clear from this casting description, the fact that he's alive and a character, that Season 1 of this show will be adapting the Rogue Prince novella. Again, expanded into the Heirs of the Dragon chapter of Fire and Blood. In the fandom, we call it the Rogue Prince era, because that's how we were first exposed to it. But the question we're left with is, how will the show deal with the passage of time in the Rogue Prince? It's not like A Song of Ice and Fire, where there was, generally 1 year per book or per season, a little more, a little less. Officially, Rogue Prince has this big sweep of time across 30 years. Characters are born and grow up in it. Don't get me wrong, the actual war, once you get to the Princess and the Queen, the war slows down. I think they might actually do like 6 months per season in order to tell it all. The war lasts 2 years, but if you're looking at the chapter breaks and major battles and turning points, I think there's like 4 seasons worth of material in that. We shall see. But focusing on Season 1 right now, how are you going to handle time skips like that in terms of casting? Rhaenyra is 6 years old when her father Viserys becomes king. So they're going to cast a child actress to play Rhaenyra in the early episodes of the first season, but then shift it to like a teenage actress, and then finally the permanent adult Rhaenyra actress by the end of Season 1. And Viserys is already an adult, so it's not as much of an issue, but he still became king when he was 26. And this actor is 47. So they're going to use a different actor in early episodes, because the description sounds like they're actually going to show the Great Council. Maybe just briefly in the first episode, or is it going to be a flashback? Or I think the smarter thing would be to present it in the first episode, and then just have a time skip. Time skips are less confusing than flashbacks. I mean, like, the example I keep pointing to is the Tudors show with Natalie Dormer in it, that they would have time skips like that, and someone played by a child actor would be later played by a teenage actor. That's how I would approach it, having time skips like that. That, are they going to de-age someone using computers, or are they going to have someone aged up, with age makeup? This guy's 47, and Viserys died at 52. He's closer to when he died, but everyone's consistently like 5 to 10 years younger than the end of it. So they're going to skip to most of the season being the middle of Rogue Prince? I'm not sure. And I brought up, why did I mention Viserys' weight gain and stuff, that he was in such bad health by the end of his reign, and consider this is a medieval world where people age faster, that his physical description when he was really out of shape, when he's 52, he looked like he was 62. That he did not look like a healthy man, young for his age. He looked older than his years. So I'm not sure if they're going to need age makeup for that, but you can do that. So I don't know. These are big questions to bring up of how will you... This is one of the things we would, in good faith, ask the writers if they ever gave a real Q&A, and not accusingly, just how will you handle the passage of time in the Rogue Prince? That the people you're casting are a little younger. Clearly, Viserys is younger than when he died. So we'll see what happens. And I'm thinking on a season scale of, like adult Rhaenyra will show up in the season finale. Maybe they're going to do like the Great Council of Harrenhal only in the first half of episode 1, and then switch to the main actress by the end of the first episode, just digitally de-aged or something. I can see that happening too. I'm not really sure what the right way to do this is. Well, please talk about this in the comments. I look forward to the discussion. Also, the announcement said a few other things about other characters that they're casting. Like, it mentioned we're going to be casting Aegon II, that's obvious. Mentioned stuff about Alicent's other children. They didn't say who they're casting it yet, just admitted this character will be in the show. And they also mentioned a new writer they're hiring. She sounded nice. So those are separate from Viserys, but they seemed important enough that I'm going to split those off into other news videos to give more focus to them. So I'm splitting those off. Check back. Those videos will follow right after this one.